April 1945. Berlin is burning. The Third Reich is on its knees. And from the east comes thunder. This is the story of how the Red Army stormed the heart of Hitler's empire and beat the Allies to Berlin. Women and girls waited in line for rations while listening and dread to a dull, constant war of thunder coming from the east. The rumbling was the sound of 8,983 Soviet artillery pieces hurling a stockpile of 7 million shells at the German defenses on the Oder River line. The bombardment was so immense in Berlin. We all know World War II ended in Europe with Hitler's suicide and Germany's surrender in May 1945. But who really brought the war to Hitler's doorstep? Today, we dive deep into one of the most brutal urban battles in human history, the Battle of Berlin, and how the Soviets got there first. By early 1945, both the Western Allies and the Soviet Union were closing in on Germany from two sides. Eisenhower's forces pushed from the west, while Stalin's Red Army crushed everything in its path from the east. But there was one prize they both had their eyes on: Berlin. At the Yalta Conference, tensions rose. Churchill feared Soviet dominance in Eastern Europe. Stalin made it clear Berlin would be his. In accordance with the Yalta Conference agreement, given the staggering losses sustained by the Soviets, over 80,000 deaths and nearly 300,000 wounded, he was probably right. On April 20th, 1945, the Nazi elite gathered one last time to honor their leader as Hitler marked his 56th birthday. Outside in the increasingly ruined Berlin housewives queued for food and news from the one-page newspaper Goebbels published. On April 16, 1945, the Soviets launched Operation Berlin, the largest artillery bombardment in history. Over 20,000 guns lit up the skies. Behind them, more than 2.5 million Soviet soldiers were ready to storm the capital. At the daily staff conference, Hitler announced he would stay and make his final stand in Berlin. Following the meeting, the leadership concocted reasons to leave Berlin while Hitler was recorded on his final newsreel inspecting a group of Hitler Youth boys who had won Iron Crosses for taking out Soviet tanks. But Berlin wasn't going down without a fight. Hitler ordered every man, woman, and child to defend the capital. The result? A brutal, block-by-block bloodbath. The battle was unlike anything the Red Army had faced before. Every building was a fortress. Snipers on rooftops, booby traps in alleys, and tanks ambushed from basement garages. Hitler studied his maps and ordered General Steiner, who commanded the 3rd SS Panzer Corps, to counterattack, smash through Soviet lines, and join up with the Berlin garrison forces on paper. The 3rd SS Panzer Corps had 3 elite divisions, but in reality, his forces consisted of 6 understrength battalions with hardly any artillery and very few panzers. A Soviet officer recalled, "We didn't fight over streets. We fought over every floor of every building." He had at his disposal 45,000 regular army troops, 40,000 boys and old men in folk-term units, a collection of sailors brought in at Grand Admiral Karl Donut's orders and left Waffe flak units all day. On the 24th, the Soviets pushed hard against the increasingly desperate defenders, completing the encirclement of the city. So why didn't the Americans or British get there first? Eisenhower made a strategic call. He didn't want to risk thousands of lives over a city that had already been promised to the Soviets. Instead, Allied troops stopped short, letting Stalin take the glory and the devastation. As Soviet shells shook the Führer bunker, Hitler's world collapsed. On April 30th, 1945, with Red Army troops just streets away, Hitler took his own life. Lieutenant General Raymond, who commanded Berlin, signed more than 2,000 such passes. Quite happy to be rid of the useless golden pheasants, with law and order breaking down, civilians turned out to loot, as the only source of marginally fresh meat left in the dying city. Citizens cut up dead horses that lay all over Berlin streets at the Fuhrer bunker. 2 days later, Berlin fell, and on May 2nd, Soviet troops captured the last German defenders. The pointless fighting continued at the F bunker. While everyone was planning their escape, Goebbels' wife poisoned 6 of her children. After that, Josef and Magda Goebbels made their way up to the Reichstag garden and shot themselves. Their remains were cremated on the spot on May 2nd. Weidli took it upon himself to surrender the remnants of the Berlin garrison, bringing to an end the fighting in Berlin, although it would take another 6 days before the overall surrender of Germany's forces to the Allies, finally bringing to an end 6 years of fighting in Europe. Berlin lay in ruins. Over 80,000 Soviet soldiers died taking the city. For Stalin, it was a monumental victory. For Europe, it marked the beginning of a new kind of war, the Cold War. The Soviet presence in Berlin would last another 45 years, until the wall came down in 1989. The Red Army entered Berlin first. They paid the price in blood. The red flag flew over the Reichstag, the ultimate symbol of victory. But in doing so, they changed the fate of Europe forever.